about 3 weeks ago, an ad came on the television for a whole home generator. And my wife said, don't you think we should think about getting one of those? And I looked at her
I fell off
and
my
I said,
chair if my wife would have
yeah,
said that.
and I said, Mike would just love to hug you right now because he's always promoting, redundant power and emergency preparedness at your home. And I said, I'm the one who's been resistant.
Hi, everybody. This is Chris. And hey, Al, you know what time it is.
Hey, boy, Chris, I sure do. It's time for another Readiness Rewired Healthcare Preparedness podcast. And I'm excited about this one. Tell us, we've got a special edition today.
We do. We're going to be calling upon one of our own here to enlighten the other two, you and I being the other two.
Yeah.
And Mike is going to share with us. We're going to have a good conversation about, I think, things that we as preparedness professionals need to think about for our own personal preparedness. So, Mike?
Well, yeah, you guys wanted to have a discussion about power failure readiness, right? Power failure readiness, obviously a big deal to us in the hospital, backup generators and, making sure everything can kick right in within 10 seconds of losing power in a hospital, all that stuff we've been living with in our careers all our lives. But then, a lot of this translates to us at home, and anybody at home has to be concerned about this. So if power failure is something that occurs in your area where you live, this discussion may be interesting. Who knows? Now, I don't know everything. And the other thing I will say too is the stuff I do and the stuff I do use, I've bought all myself. So this podcast does not have a sponsor. So any of the equipment or any of the brands or anything that I throw at you, this is stuff that I personally purchased, and it's not been given to us to discuss, right? So that's
right. And there's no collective endorsement of any particular products. These are based on, I guess, mainly your experience, and Sal and I are learning and wanting to be better prepared, and you're willing to share some of your experiences. We're really looking forward to this. So this is really, we talk about generators, for example, which will be part of the conversation. We're not talking about hospital generators. We're talking about us as preparedness coordinators having better preparation at home so we're not distracted or needing to leave the workplace during a disaster to go home and mitigate something that may be fomenting at home. So, and as you mentioned, we're looking at tornadoes. I think the Midwest was hit by a particularly ugly derecho. We could even have a very localized, maybe there's another disaster issue at work, and I could have a substation go out in my neighborhood that could impact me. So, and then again, winter weather here again in the northern part of the country has a significant or an increased likelihood of power outages. So, power disruptions or outages are something that I think we can personally be better prepared for. And I know you've done a lot of work and research, and we've touched on it in the past. I think the other maybe thing we ought to share is that you're not a deep state prepper, are you, Mike? You're talking about just practical stuff.
I started digging that bunker in my backyard, where I was going to put a ready-to-eat meals and all that stuff. But, I just, at my age, my back started hurting. So I just quit digging and said the heck with it. I don't store a whole bunch of ready-to-eat meals and ammunition and crap like that. I'm not into it, man.
Al, do you?
Well, I was going to say, when we first talked and pitched this, I thought, oh man, generators, all that stuff. Yeah. And I'm emergency preparedness, but it's like, I don't want to spend the money and I don't want to do this stuff. And we'll probably spend 10 minutes talking about it on the podcast, and then we'll look at each other and go, now what? But as I got researching and prepping for this, just to to read and learn a little bit, it's like, wow, I have a lot of questions, and not that everybody's in the same boat, not that everybody needs the same kind of redundancies in their home, but there's a lot of really good information out there if you research the reputable sites, and
Yep.
that's where we're always looking. There's some reputable sources out there. Read and research before you buy any of the things, because I know, Mike, I think you would support. These are just some ideas and thoughts you have. We're not making a recommendation that everybody run out and buy a $10,000 generator, but just give some information about what's available and what the options are, because there are pros and cons to everything, and that's what I'm excited to talk about today. So, Mike, get us started and roll us into this thing. This is going to be cool.
Well, you make a good point about don't want to spend the money, or maybe, the wives or your spouses don't want to let you spend the money. Why do you want to buy? That's a waste of time. We don't need to worry about that very often, that kind of thing. Well, it really depends. One thing that I've noticed where I live, most of our utilities are underground, coming out to us. And so have we had a lot of power failures to deal with? No. Although I will say, about 3 months ago, we probably had our longest power failure that I can recall, and we've lived where we live over 20 years, and it was out for maybe 2 to 3 hours. Okay, but it was in the evening, so it was dark out, kind of cold out, but there was an important sports game on TV, and my wife was dying to watch it. And it's like, oh, here's my chance to show her that all this crap I've done in the past to, have backup power will actually be useful. And so I kicked that stuff in. And as I looked around my neighborhood, everything's dark. Everybody's, houses are dark. There's no street lights. It's very eerie, right? But there's lights on at our house. And we're down watching in the family room, watching the sports game. We got our beverages. I was able to run the microwave. We had some dinner. I mean, it was no problem. And she looks at me and goes, maybe it's not so bad that I'm married to a geek. And I'm like, well, there you go. Yeah. It actually paid off once.
And I'll jump in and defend some of the wives or the spouses out there, because just because there's 3 males here in our podcast, it isn't always the female who's saying, why are you spending the money? I was on the side of, I'm not sure I really want to spend the money. And about 3 weeks ago, an ad came on the television for a whole home generator. And my wife said, don't you think we should think about getting one of those? And I looked at her.
I fell off my chair if my wife would have said that.
Well, and I said, Mike would just love to hug you right now, because he's always promoting, redundant power and emergency preparedness at your home. And I said, I'm the one who's been resistant. So for those spouses and females out there, it's not always the female who's against spending the money. You have to just see the benefits and see the advantages, and then know where you're going to go.
And as we say in our business, right, it's the hazards and vulnerability analysis, right? So during the recent derecho, I was without power for 8 days.
That's a long
my personal
time,
residence, and we have overhead power lines that go through backyards, difficult to get to. We were one of the last neighborhoods to get it. So looking at that, looking at some of the climate challenges that have occurred recently and the grid burdens and stuff, I think, it's incumbent on all of us to consider, what we need to do for personal preparedness for our loved ones and even for ourselves when we go home, take a break from work. And so, again, I think there's great reasons to listen to Mike. And I would say, I personally am in a place where I'm interested in this. We've kind of talked about it and I backed away, and I'm ready to move forward now. I think the technology is there, and I think Mike's got some good insight. So this is a great starting point. I'm looking forward to it. All right.
So just make sure everybody knows I'm an amateur. Okay. I'm an amateur geek. And a lot of what I've drawn in the past is my years of ham radio operator, and hams are all about backup power. We want to be able to have, communications capability under any conditions, total power outages, we can still talk. So that kind of thing, right? So I guess really the way to start this is you look at, I like the way Chris approaches it. You do a hazard vulnerability analysis. Look at the likelihood of something happening in your area, to your house, to your neighborhood, whatever. And like I said, we've not had a history of a lot of power failures where I live. However, I've got a ranch and I've got a full basement and most of it's finished off. I've got a home theater room and a bar area and stuff like that. And so I also have a sump pump. And the biggest thing that bothered me when I moved into this house was the fact that we are sort of on the downside of a hill, right? I've got some neighbors up the hill from me. Well, everything runs downhill, man. And I don't have a walkout basement. And so, I'll tell you, when it rains, my sump pump's running. And the only time I can remember it didn't run most of the year was within the last year or year and a half because of all the drought conditions. So my sump's gotten a pretty good break. So the first thing when I look into power backups was for my sump pump because I didn't want my basement flooded, right? So, you look at that issue and then you look at what you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to back up and what's the likelihood of it happening? And like Chris says, how long is it going to last? Is it going to last maybe a few hours like what I experienced recently? Or God, 8 days, man, I can't imagine going 8 days without power. Actually, I can. And that's why I've kind of done what I've done. And yeah, my spouse wasn't real thrilled about that. But then all of a sudden when it happens, they go, maybe you weren't so wrong. So here's the first thing to think about. After you've figured out what your risks are, what is the likelihood of it happening, and what's the likely duration of it? You just kind of look at it. You can look at historically on websites. A lot of the major power vendors, companies, the grids, they'll tell you, what your likelihood is, what kind of power outages have occurred in the last 12, 24 months, whatever. So you can kind of look at the history of it. And then you start to think, all right, power goes out. How am I immediately going to be affected? What's the first things that I'm going to start to worry about? Well, like I experienced 3 months ago, we were just plunged into darkness, right? Everything's dark because it happened at night. Okay, well, what do you need, guys?
Light.
You need light. All right, well, that's pretty simple. You can grab your cell phone, and there's that neat little flashlight on the back. All right, so immediately, if you're like us and you always have your cell phone with you, at least you've got something to do right away. You've got your flashlight in your phone. All right, so now the next thing you think about is, I have light. What about communication? Well, your phone, right? Your phone is your communication largely. And so the thing you want to maintain, it's not only light initially, but it's also your communication. You want to maintain that cell phone's charge. Well, what kind of charge have you got on your cell phone right now? Let's say power goes out right now. All right, I look at mine, and for some reason, I didn't plug it in last night. I'm down to 32%. All right, well, what are you going to do about that? Well, it's not like you can take your little USB port and plug it into anything right now, or unless you have something you can plug it into. So one thing I'd highly recommend everybody does is get a power brick. These power bricks are so cheap. And this backs your phone up. This makes sure that your phone has got power and can continue to have power. Now, you got to be a little careful on what you buy because of the cheapies out there. Some of them have burned up because let's face it, these are lithium ion batteries. That's all they are.
Yep.
And so you got to make sure that you get a decent quantity or quality one. And then if you fly anywhere, you got to make sure that, TSA isn't going to take it away from you because they have a certain capacity power brick that you're allowed to bring on board the aircraft. Okay. And I do with my flying, I do a lot of carry-on. So as a carry-on, I think you can do 20,000 milliamp power bricks. That's the maximum. This one I've got right here is, I believe, a 10,000 milliamp. Let me look here because I know it's made it through TSA. And what I like about this one is that it's got the little prongs that you flip up and you plug it into the wall, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have a separate, wall wart that you plug in, and then you plug this in with a USB cord or something like that. So this goes directly into the wall and it charges up. And what I like about this guy is that when you have him plugged in, you actually see a digital output. I don't know if you could see that. I think this one has been sitting for about 2 months, 3 months or so, and I haven't used it, and it's down to 93%. Okay. So you know how much percentage power you have of this guy. And then it's got a USB and USB plug, so you can put a regular cord into it to go to your phone, or it's also got USB-C that it goes to your Apple products like your iPad and stuff. But what I really like about this guy is that it's got cords built in. So you don't have to have a cord. This is all you need. It's got the cords you need for whatever device. Like this one is the USB-C, and then this one is a lightning plug. So it's got the wires already built into it that go right to your phones or to your tablet. And so you don't need to carry extra cords. They're pretty short, but they're right built in, ready to go. And so you can keep your phone up and running for quite a long time. You can charge your phone a number of times with one this powerful. So it's just some sort of power brick is probably the first thing you think about to try to keep your cell phone up and running. Does that make sense, guys?
Absolutely. Right. In fact, Mike, for the people who are watching, I've got little things like this as well. I picked them up from a conference. And
sure. Freebie.
I keep this charged because then I can plug my phone into it, and my grandkids, when they've been at different sporting events and stuff all day playing basketball, whatever, they're on their phone quite a bit, and yet their mom and dad, everybody wants to keep in contact with them if they have to run around, do some things. Well, their phones go dead too. I have them carry, and say, hey, do you guys have a little power brick that you can carry in your backpack? Because if you plug it in and you need to get a hold of somebody to come pick you up or do whatever, you got it. Because phones, you're right, phones do go dead. Not everybody wakes up in the morning with 100% power on their phone.
Make them small enough they're almost credit card size with a really slim profile cord. So, again, it's assessing where you're most likely to need it, because you could have a power outage, as I think, as you were saying, Al. It could be at a ball game. It could be, while traveling, as Mike was mentioning. So it's having something and then making sure that you're maybe quarterly making sure it's charged and ready to go, and then everybody in the house knows where they're at.
So then once you get your phone taken care of, you got some backups to your phone. Great. Now you need to think about lighting, right? Okay. So everybody should have like a flashlight. That's pretty simple. Put a flashlight on your nightstand or something, or have some flashlights around the house. Now, flashlights are great. because you can direct the beam. They can be pretty bright. LED flashlights don't consume much power. You can get plug-in types that are rechargeable, or you get ones with you put batteries in or whatever. But a flashlight makes good sense. But then if you want to light your, let's say, kitchen area or whatever, then you think about something that's more of a floodlight, something that give you 360-degree light. I'm a camper. And so, I picked up a Coleman. You remember the old Coleman lanterns that you used to put, fuel into and all that crap? That stuff stunk. Okay, you can still get those things, and some of them are even considered, collectible, and you can pay big bucks for them. But these new ones that are LED, man, they'll run 6-8 hours on some batteries, and that's just a cheap. I think I paid $12 for this. So this is kept up in my kitchen, and this is what we used when our power failure went out, so we could cook in the kitchen and do everything else. So just have some sort of cheap lighting capability so that you have lights in your home, and so you can put all your other stuff together or whatever you need, right?
Hey, Mike, do you have headlamps? I'm a big fan as an older person of headlamps because I need my hands free for balance.
I've got two of them. I've got 2 or 3, and I make sure they have the infrared red because I'm an astronomer guy, so I'm wearing that out in the driveway or the backyard when I'm looking through my telescopes, and the red saves your night vision. So yeah, I'm a big headlight guy. And in fact, when in the hospital, I took some grant money and I bought a pallet of headlamps from, I think I got a bid out of Lowe's or something. And so I put those with our evacuation sleds all across the facility and up into Children's Hospital and all that stuff, so that where the evacuation sleds are, they've also got headlamps so the nurses and staff can have their hands free while they're dealing with a power failure, in case, for example, our generators don't kick in.
Right.
Chris, I'm a huge head lamp guy.
And I would just say, as a person that's been on the receiving end of that light, if you can get the adjustable kind so that you're not always shining directly in somebody's face, but you can adjust it to your workspace, that makes sense too. But some great options with,
The nurses like the red because they'd be able to just click that on to red at night to go in and check a patient if they were sleeping and didn't have this blaring light come out of their head, So the red feature was really, really something they liked.
And then you can go from red light to dark, just absolute darkness if you need to, with your pupils being able to adjust pretty easily. I think there's a lot of safety features with that. So great ideas.
All right. So, all kinds of lighting capabilities out there. Now, then the next thing you start thinking about is in my home, well, now what am I going to be concerned about, to run and maintain decent conditions? That's going to be up to you. Do you live in an apartment, a condo? Do you live in a home? What all have you got in your house? You got to kind of take inventory of everything that really requires power and then make a list of all the things that you want to prioritize. And a lot of times people will say, well, I want to be able to cook or at least heat something up so we could eat. If you live away from town and you have a well, that's a biggie because people want to be able to power their well if they live out in a rural area or away from town, out near a lake or something like that, so that they have water. And so you had to look at maybe your well. People look at their refrigerators and their freezers. Well, refrigerators and freezers, it depends. If you don't open those things up per se much at all, if at all, a refrigerator, a freezer, they're probably good for up to about 24 hours, as long as you're not opening the door a whole big bunch and stuff like that. You keep the darn thing shut. Your refrigerator and freezer could be as good as 24 hours without being repowered. So it just kind of depends on what you're up to. And if you're going to be opening the darn thing and getting stuff out, that's a different story. It's going to shorten the amount of time the food's going to be safe. So do you need to run that refrigerator? And do you need to run that freezer? Now you need to figure out, all right, now I'm getting into major appliances like a microwave, like a refrigerator, like a freezer. You need to know how much power consumption you're dealing with there, and you need to total it up to figure out what your needs are. Now, something that you guys learned when you took your ham radio courses, remember, there's volts, there's watts, and there's amps, right? So you need to figure out each of your appliances or things that you want to back up or make sure you've got redundancy for. You need to figure out some things. Volts, for example, is the force of the electricity traveling through the wire. 12 volt versus 110 volt. Okay. When you're looking at volts, that's the force. That's like if you equate it to plumbing, it's like turning the faucet on farther or less. Okay. Less force, more force. Voltage is all about force. And most things in most homes are 110, right? Or 120. They're 100, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's 110 volt power. A dryer, on the other hand, if you have an electric dryer, it's more than likely 220, 240. We'll say 220 for the sake of argument. That's a lot more force that you're dealing with to run that dryer. So it's going to require 220 volts, and that's tough to provide sometimes. And then there's amps. Amps is quantification of the electricity. It's the volume. It's like in plumbing, it's the volume of water passing by a fixed point in a certain amount of time. So amperage is like consumption. It's the flow of water or flow of electricity. So best thing to find out is the wattage requirement. Wattage is the energy that appliance uses. In other words, what does it consume? And so I've got some examples. There are charts out there that you can download and look at on the internet. And I'll put a lot of these things as hot links in the description of this video. So you can just look down below the video here in the description and see some of these links. Typical wattages of appliances in your home. There's all kinds of charts out there. The solar people are really big into that. If you got solar in your house, you need to know how much power your house it consumes as a total. So the solar people are really into this. So let's give you some examples. A coffee maker, like, how much power does your coffee maker need? Well, I want to tell you too, if you're really going to do this right, if you really want to know how much power your personal appliances used, you need this little device. It's called a kilowatt. KILLAWATT. This is about a $20 item. You get it on eBay or you can get it on Amazon. And you put this kilowatt meter, you plug it into the wall or into an extension cord going to the wall, and then you plug the appliance or device into it and let it run. And you'll get a readout of both voltage. What's the voltage of the line? It's probably going to be 110, 120. It'll give you the wattage and the amperage, how much power it's consuming, and the watts it takes, the energy used by the appliance. So you can actually measure it. And I did that around my home so I could figure out exactly how much backup power I needed. So here, for example, the laptop that I'm using for this podcast right now, the laptop, when it's charging, uses 27.4 watts. Okay, you write that down. If it's that's to charge it. Okay. But if you turn the laptop on and now the display is running and it's actually on the internet using the Wi-Fi system, let's say, for example, that doubles. And so now you're up to about 54, 55 watts. If I've got the laptop up and running and it's consuming power like it is right now. Okay. You write that down. My wife's Keurig, a Keurig, if you're going to make coffee, a typical coffee maker might run between 900 and 1200 watts. Okay, so 900 to 1200 watts. But my wife's Keurig, when it first boots up in the morning, while it heats up, 1335 watts. And that's a countertop standard size Keurig. Then all of a sudden, as soon as it's heated up, it drops to almost zero. But then when you go to dispense the coffee out of the Keurig, now it's taking about 2 watts. So it doesn't require much. But boy, to heat it up, that's a lot of wattage, I'll be honest with you. Then I think about my wife too. Okay, what about her blow dryer? Okay, if she can't blow dry her hair, she's not going to be happy in the morning. So if you put it on low heat, her blow dryer took 402 watts, according to the kilowatt meter. On high heat, 1,588 watts. Boy, anything that puts out power, heat like that, it's going to consume a lot of wattage. So 1,588 watts. Think about that. Air fryers are real big right now, right? And so, if you have a power outage, it'd be nice, at least you could run your microwave or your air fryer so you could heat some food up. Okay. Our air fryer, which is a typical countertop air fryer, when it's running 1,360 watts. So 1,360 watts. And if you add your coffee maker to it, boy, it builds up. So you can only run probably one at a time. Microwave. So we got a typical over the stove built-in microwave, right? That sucker about 1,600 watts when it's running. So I wanted to be able to run the microwave, but then I'd also wanted to run my wife's blow dryer, wanted to run my wife's Keurig, all of those things. You got to figure out how you're going to do that, right? So are you getting an idea that this is the kind of assessment you need to do to decide exactly what kind of power capability you need for backup?
So my question, you're just to clarify it because this is power management for dummies, and I'm asking the question on behalf of Al.
No, I have the power question for idiots side. You have the dummy side.
But you're creating sort of a grid or an Excel sheet that's going to list all these items and then kind of their peak wattage, and then again what they need for their different functions, and then we're going to go back and look at that and determine what's essential. Iron
Right.
Al might say no blow drying if the power is out, no hair blow drying if the power is out. Then we wouldn't have to consider that.
I don't know.
That's
man, with my marriage, I don't know if that would work, dude.
It'd be over.
It'd be over.
Well, that's why it's an essential service for you.
It's an essential thing.
It's looking at how many at one time you might need, like over time, and during the use of a device, it's going to vary. So the kilowatt device, that was a brand name for
It is.
kind of a voltage meter, whatever.
It's a brand name.
Good place to start, right?
Yep.
Kilowatt.
Yep.
Awesome.
Kilowatt.
Awesome stuff. Al, anything from you on this? We're not lost, are you?
Well, I'm still trying to debate whether I should be more of a dummy or an idiot. I'm not sure which category I fit in, but
Coffee or dry clothes.
That's right. Well, and Mike, we'll get into it a little bit, because when you're doing your evaluation, when you talk about blow dryers and when you talk about, the Keurig and that type of thing, it's pretty easy to measure. Now, when you're talking about it, and there might be the difference between a whole house generator and a
Ooh.
portable generator type
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
which we'll talk about, because it's not easy to unplug your refrigerator to figure out how many watts. It's not
Oh, it's
easy.
easy. It's
Well,
easy.
no. To unplug your refrigerator, I got to pull it out from its area and
Yeah.
unplug. You got to
And
do
it's
a
on
lot
wheels. It just slides out, man.
well, not as easy as you think, but yes,
Okay.
you can. It all slid in there. It can all, but it's not
It's all
easy
those
to
open
do
bottles in there that Al doesn't want to spill when he wheels them
Okay,
out.
a typical refrigerator, a typical frost-free 16 cubic foot refrigerator will take about 725 watts. Now, Chris mentioned something, and this is an important term, peak. Peak watt demand is at the very start of when an electric device is turned on. So like you turn on a fan or you plug in your refrigerator or whatever, the condenser is going to pop in, right? And when that thing pops in, you may see a spike, oftentimes, several, 20, 30% higher than what its maximum demand might be. So you have to be able to take over that kind of peak thing. But as a refrigerator is running, now this is generally with the compressor running about 725 watts on average.
So again, for people that don't understand the technology of the refrigerator, that compressor may not be running all the time. It reaches a cooling point and then it holds, and then when it warms up, so it's going to cycle, and then our coffee maker,
up and down,
when we first plug it in, will cycle up. But if you're making a second cup of coffee, it's going to cycle back up.
right
So again,
back up.
people need to understand the physics of the electricity that they're going to be needing to use.
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely. A few other examples. People always are concerned, well, can I run a heater with it? Like a little space heater or something. Well, yeah, you can run a space heater, but that's, again, anything that produces heat is going to draw a lot of energy. So I've got a small space heater that I keep in my RV, and I try to use that for heat and not use the furnace in the RV. If you run the fan only in one of those small space heaters, at least mine runs about 22 to 25 watts. No big deal. Put it on low heat, now you're up around 500 watts. You put it on high heat, now you're up probably somewhere around 1,000 to 1,300 watts if you're running a space heater. So that gives you another idea of that's the kind of consumption that those kind of things have. A simple window fan, let's say you just want to put a window fan in the window and have it running, somewhere between 55 and 250 watts. So not a lot of power there. My brother-in-law, he's kind of a cheap guy, and he wants to run the fan on his furnace because he has no other backup source for heat, and his furnace is gas. Well, okay, once the furnace is ignited, you got to have the blower running, right? So you got the blower running to push the heat around. Average furnace fan will run at about 750 watts. Wow. And so he came up with a plan to be able to just run the furnace fan if he wanted to, and I'll show you how he did it. And he did it really cheap. Chris, you mentioned something earlier about clothes dryers. If you have a gas dryer, that's one thing. But if it's an electric dryer, like a lot of people have, how many volts did I say that thing needed to be?
220, 240.
Very good. So now you're talking some serious wattage, right? So in a typical electric clothes dryer, you could be anywhere from 1,800 all the way up to 5,000 watts. That's a lot of wattage. It could be that high. So these are ranges, right? It really depends on the manufacturer and whatnot. That's why it's really nice to have something like this. Although you're not going to be able to measure a dryer with your kilowatt device. It doesn't have the right prongs. Anyway, so TVs. People want to watch TV. You want to watch the sports game during power failure. Typical 19-inch television could be around 65 to 100 watts. 27-inch television, 113 watts. Flat screens tend to run less. A pretty good sized flat screen television, it could be somewhere like the ones in my rig, my RV are I think they're about 40-inch. They run about 55 watts. But some of the bigger ones, you can get up to about 120 watts. So not a lot of power consumption in the modern flat screen TV, which is, I think, good news. Well pumps. People living in rural areas, if you want to back up your well pump and you want to have water, usually you're somewhere between 250 and 1,200 watts. Okay, so that's kind of the power there. Anyway, those just give you ideas of how much typical products might draw.
Sump
Do
pump.
that analysis.
Hey, Mike, sump pump, because you mentioned that.
Sump
That's
pump,
probably critical.
same deal. 750. Could be around 750.
Wow.
Peak could approach 1,000. It depends on the size, the horsepower of your sump pump. But mine, I think it's about a 1.25 horse, if I'm not mistaken, about 750 when it hits. Now you better make sure, because that's going to run off and on depending on how much water is pouring into your sump, right?
Yeah.
All right. So that's the task first, guys. You sit there and make a list of all your appliances that you really want to back up and you need to figure out. If you don't get a kilowatt machine, little device monitor to figure out what exactly they are, you can at least get these charts. And I'll put a link down below on what a typical consumption would be of these household appliances. Sound good?
It's okay so far. Now we gotta find the devices to run that. And the struggle that a lot of people will have is how to hook them up, because, and I think a safety reminder is, don't go running your portable generator inside the house
or in your garage.
Because that's a carbon monoxide, that's a poisonous gas type issue.
Absolutely.
Let's remember the safety issues there. So it's not as easy as bringing a generator in and plugging something in and letting it run as you asphyxiate yourself.
For your gas-powered ones, battery ones you can have inside.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So now you decide, okay, which direction do I want to go? Do I want to go, I want to do the old standby kind of thing where you have a gasoline-powered generator, which can also be run by propane. You can get a kit to take and convert to propane instead of gasoline if you want. Do I need one? Do I want one that's portable, one that I can actually pick up and carry? Or do I want to have one that's bigger, and then you're going to probably have it on wheels and you're going to pull it around on wheels like a luggage cart? Or are you going to have a permanently fixed one outside your home on a concrete pad that's hooked up to natural gas? And so it's an automatic house-wide standby generator. Now, I have another brother-in-law that did that. But there you're talking anywhere from 10 to 12 to maybe even 15 grand to put something like that in. And it automatically kicks in, within, we have at the hospital, within 10 seconds, that thing boots itself up and it automatically backs up power through a transfer switch, what's called a transfer switch. We'll get into that in a minute, but let's take it back a few steps and let me talk about my other brother-in-law who's cheap. He got something like this. This is what you see oftentimes, the guys with the big thump, thump, thump car stereos in their cars or their pick-em-up trucks with the big subwoofers and stuff. They need some serious wattage to be able to run these high-powered car stereos, right? Something like this could work, and this is what my other brother-in-law did. This is a 750-watt, 12-volt inverter. Okay, so this hooks up directly to the terminals of a 12-volt car battery, if you will. Or it could be a deep cycle marine battery. This could be hooked up to a battery like that. And in a car or a truck, it would have direct kind of permanent connections to the car terminal, battery terminals. And then it's got an off-on power switch, and it's got two 110 outlets, 10-volt outlets right in front where you could plug something in, right? But again, it's got a limit to amount of power it puts out. It puts out about 750 watts. Now, they have all different sizes of these. If you ever stop in a truck stop along an interstate, oftentimes you'll see these things in there in the trucker section where you have all the CB radios and the antennas and all the various accoutrements that you might want if you're a trucker. They'll have these in there. And, there's a couple of USB ports there, so you could plug in your cell phone if you want to. So this is what my brother-in-law said. And he goes, well, my garage is attached, so I'm just going to go out and hook this up to the battery in our cars that are outside, one car at a time, and then run an extension cord to his furnace fan and run it. Now, I think his actually is 1,000 watts that he picked, because he knew that when the furnace fan runs, it's probably going to be about 750 watts. And there's that peak when it first starts up, it's going to spike and then come down to 750. So he had to get a little bit bigger one. Now, could this work? You can get something like this for $40, $50, $75, pretty cheap, right? The other thing I'll mention is that, and this isn't a huge concern, as huge a concern as people say, that what kind of power comes out of here. Some people call it dirty versus clean. Well, what I think about, because I have oscilloscopes and stuff, whether the sine wave that the electricity makes on an oscilloscope is a nice smooth perfect sine wave, or if it's kind of jagged and squared, that's called a modified sine wave. These cheaper ones puts out what's called a modified sine wave electrical current, and it's not a pure kind of electrical current like what you get out of your plug-in in your house. Okay, your plugs in your house. Some sensitive electronic equipment may not consume that dirty or modified sine wave output electricity very well. Usually it has to be a sensitive electronic device. Some people say you shouldn't run your refrigerator with a modified sine wave like this. I don't know that that's so true. But I think anymore, if you're going to buy something like this, it'd be nice if it was nice, clean electrical power, like you get out of the grid in your electricity in your house. Probably a nice, pure sine wave output inverter would be the way to go, and spend a little extra money for it. So that's an option, right? $750. What could you run with that, Chris?
So, Mike, the inverter doesn't generate the power; it just translates it, right, from another source, like from a car or battery or something like that. Engine.
Right. You're taking 12 volts, and it's called an inverter. It changes it to 110. That's the bottom line.
So usable for another, and that, I'm assuming then with electric cars, now that they're talking about being able to plug in electric cars and run your house, there's something in there that conditions that electricity, like an inverter on the in the car that does it. All right.
Yep. Yeah. And then on the other end, like your brother-in-law, you have to be savvy enough or hire someone to be able to hook that inverter up to the fan in your furnace to be able to blow it, because you just don't have a plug-in for your fan that's easy to get to for the novices. Now, for a guy who knows furnaces, probably not terribly hard, but I would think it's like, how the hell do I hook that up? All right, I've got an inverted power from my battery, which I got to remember to start my car. I'm not going to be running my car tomorrow because the battery's going to be dead. So you gotta take into account all of the ancillary things that are going to happen. The consequences of doing one thing.
Yeah, whenever you're messing with electricity, you got to know what you're doing, and it's better to consult a professional and have them do it if you're not sure. Here's another option. This is one I've had for a number of years. Remember I told you about the whole sump pump worry that I had, right?
Yeah.
I put this in my basement years and years ago. Still works. I've really never needed it. This is a very large inverter, if you will. This one is 2,000 watts, 4,000 watt peak. So it can put out as much as 4,000 watts for a very, very short period of time. Constant, it can put out as high as 2,000 watts. And it's got 1, 2, 3 110 outlet plugs to it. This is what I was running my sump pump with, and I had it hooked up to 2 golf cart batteries. So golf car batteries, by the way, are very, very, they're heavy, they're big, typical lead acid. They're not made out of lithium or anything like the newer technology, although some of them are. The ones I have are 6-volt, kind you can buy at Costco. They're about $99 each, and you wire them in a series. We can go into the whole series versus parallel wiring thing. I don't want to do that, but you have to wire 2 of these 6-volt batteries in a series together to equal 12 volts. Now, and that's hooked up to this device. Look at the size of the cabling. This is 1/0 conduit with a fuse on it. So this is pretty heavy duty stuff because of the draw that it can be pulling out of those batteries. Batteries like that are very powerful. They'll kill you. And there's enough amperage in those things that you can do some serious damage. Hence, that's why the size of these cables. So I had it robust enough that it could run my sump pump if I needed to, until I came up with a better option. And something like this, $250. Something like that, $275. You can buy something like this. So you can get really powerful inverters out there that are actually, this one's not pure sine wave, but pure sine wave for a reasonable amount of money. But then you need a power source to hook them up to. You need battery system to hook it up to with 12-volt batteries. All right. So That's a complicated way to try to give yourself backup power. You can use an inverter that converts 12 volt to 110, and then that inverter can have some fairly decent capacity to it. But again, now you need batteries, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can use lithium cells, you can use lead acid cells, 12 volts, whatever. You need a way to keep them charged and, that sort of thing so that they're ready to go when you need them. What I did with my 6-volt golf cart batteries is I put 200 watts of solar on the roof. Ran power down to a solar charge controller, a little box right above them. The solar power goes into it. That device then hooks up to the batteries and keeps them charged. So if there's any solar power coming out of the panels, it goes in through this little box called a solar charge controller. I'll put a picture of one up next. And then that device automatically keeps those batteries charged until they're ready to need it. And now, of course, you have to have sunlight, right? So you have to have sunlight shining on your panels to be able to keep it up and running. So anyway, those things, I did all that and it worked fine for years. All that's kind of complicated.